All right, let's talk about this composer Robert Schumann. And I know what you might be thinking. Old classical music, kind of boring, right? Well, forget all that. This isn't just about some notes on a page. This is the story of a guy whose mind was basically a superhero movie, a total battlefield between incredible creativity and some really deep personal struggles.
And that really gets us to the big question here. Can you take all that, the noise, the confusion, the tough stuff going on inside your own head, and actually turn it into something amazing? Something beautiful? That's a question Robert Schumann spent his entire life trying to answer.
So to really get Schumann, you've got to meet his two, well, you could call them imaginary friends, but they were more like his personal avatars. It's like he had two characters he could play as. First, there was Florestan. He was the fiery, impulsive, get-it-done side. And then you had Eusebius, the quiet, dreamy, thoughtful one. Schumann's whole life, and especially his music, was this constant tug-of-war between these two guys.
Okay, so how did this all even start? Well, you know how sometimes your parents have a plan for you. A nice, safe career. Schumann was right there. But yeah, he had other ideas.
See, his dad was a bookseller, so he literally grew up surrounded by epic stories. His family really wanted him to be a lawyer. He even started law school. But his heart just wasn't in it. It was with the piano. So he made this massive decision. He dropped out to chase music, studying with a top teacher named Friedrich Wieck. I mean, talk about a huge risk. But that choice pretty much set the course for his entire life.
Now, when it came to making music, Schumann just saw things differently. For him, music wasn't just about sounding pretty. He wanted to basically hack the whole system. He was convinced that music could and should tell incredible stories, just like the books he loved.
His process was super unique. So first, he'd read a poem or a story that really moved him. Then, and this is the cool part, he'd try to translate the feelings from the story, the drama, the joy, the sadness, straight into melodies. And finally, he'd give his songs these poetic titles that were almost like little hints or Easter eggs to guide you through the story he was telling with his notes.
And this, right here, this says it all. For him, a piano wasn't just a bunch of keys and hammers. No way. It was a voice. It was a machine that could tell these amazing, complex stories without ever using a single word. He wanted you to feel the adventure, not just hear some nice tunes.
And get this. On top of being a genius composer, Schumann was basically one of the first music influencers. For real, he was a huge music critic and even started his own magazine. He used that platform to give shout-outs to other incredible composers he thought were the real deal. He's the guy who first told the world how amazing Chopin was, and he discovered this young, new guy named Johannes Brahms. He really knew how to build the hype.
But Schumann didn't do all this on his own. His story is also a love story, and he teamed up with someone who was every bit as brilliant as he was.
He fell in love with and married Clara Wieck, who just so happened to be his old piano teacher's daughter. And Clara, she was an absolute rock star. Seriously, she was one of the most famous pianists in all of Europe. She became the #1 champion of his music, performing it all over the continent and making him famous. They were a total power couple, mixing this incredible creative partnership with raising 8 kids.
But here's where the story gets more complicated, because even with all this success and a family he loved, there was always a shadow. Schumann struggled with his mental health his entire life, and you can feel that struggle woven into every note he wrote.
And if you really listen to his music, you can literally hear it. One second, it's bursting with energy and joy. That's his inner Florestan coming out to play. And then, in a heartbeat, it can flip to being slow, sad, and full of doubt. That's Eusebius. His music was like a diary of his feelings, a real-time emotional roller coaster.
This timeline kind of maps it all out. You can see that even early on, his life was a pattern of these incredible, intense bursts of creativity, followed by deep periods of depression. Marrying Clara definitely brought him a lot of happiness and some stability, but over time, his illness got worse. In 1854, he was admitted to a mental hospital, and he passed away there just 2 years later. So, after a life with such incredible highs and devastating lows, what's the takeaway? Why are we still talking about this guy almost 200 years later? Well, his legacy is absolutely huge. First of all, just look at the numbers. The guy was a machine. He wrote over 150 songs, they called them lieders back then, and each one is this perfect little package of poetry and music combined. And he didn't just write small songs. He also composed 4 massive, powerful symphonies. He proved he could tell his epic stories with a whole orchestra, not just a piano.
But honestly, his real impact goes way beyond the numbers. He completely changed the game by mixing literature and music. He used his influence as a critic to lift up other artists. He inspired whole generations of composers who came after him. And maybe most importantly, his super emotional, personal, story-driven style basically defined an entire era of music, the Romantic period.
And that brings us all the way back to that first big question. Schumann's life kind of shows us that sometimes the most powerful art comes from the most difficult experiences. It's a reminder that our struggles and our strengths aren't always separate things. Sometimes they're tangled up together. So I'll leave you with this. What do you think we can learn from a life where genius and pain were truly two sides of the same coin?